So I want to quickly just go over some of the basic drawing tools that we have here in Rhino. I'm not going to go too deep into any of them. I just want to make sure that we all have an idea of kind of where they are and how we go about using them and what they do. This is the file that we're going to go ahead and delete afterwards. We're not submitting anything or using this for anything. So it kind of gives you the freedom to just kind of click around and play around with these commands, knowing that you're not going to mess anything up. This is a trash kind of file. All right. So I have an open file, brand new file. And as always, with new files, we're going to go into units, change the units to feet and inches, set that to 1/8, and I'll hit OK. So before we actually go into the drawing commands, I want to cover layers. I know in the previous lecture, I talked about layers and just kind of explained how we use them as a means to kind of group and organize objects and drawings that we model in. Um, but I want to go in and just kind of explain how do we actually create layers, how do we organize our work with layers, and so on. So in the panels box over here on the right, now again, if you don't see layers, you might be under properties, or you might be somewhere else here. We want this kind of, actually I have no idea. I think it's a red, white, and blue triangle pie shape icon. I'm going to click on this icon and that gives me the layers. To create a new layer, we're going to go up here to the little plus sign, that pie. And again, it gives us that option with the mouse. Left click means new layer, right click new layer with random color. It doesn't really matter. We're going to adjust the colors. We're going to cover how to adjust the colors. So I'm going to left click on this and we have a new layer. Now, right here, we could go ahead and call it, let's go ahead and call it lines. Okay, and I'll go ahead and click out. There you go. Now, if I want to go back and change that, I can simply double click on the text and call it whatever it is you want to call it. You can rename it. It's very simple. I want to come over here to the right where it says color. Okay. Now the default color is black. You'll notice that we currently already have one layer that says default, and this is the default layer. So, if we go in and we start modeling and doing things, it's all going to fall under the default layer unless we tell it to draw or model in one of these additional layers that we end up creating. Okay. Now, we do have the color, going back to the color. The color helps us to kind of to visually organize our model. So if I want to, before I do that, let's go ahead and just create one more layer. So we have 3 layers. Let's call this massings. Okay. If I click in the color block box where it's black, it gives me the color wheel. And I can go ahead and choose from any of these colors over here on the left-hand side. And I could say, you know what, I want this layer to be gold or brown or orange. Now, the color that we associate to this layer does not mean that that's the color that's going to print. It has nothing to do with the final outcome. This is purely just organizational. Okay, so this is just for us who are doing the modeling. So we can adjust the color, select the color that we want. You could also click using the cursor and find the color that way. If you want to enter any of the values, you could find a color that way as well. So you could really find the color or any color you want, however you want, right? I'm going to go ahead and just click on lavender. I'll hit OK. And for massings, we'll do the same thing. Over here, let's go, I don't know, let's go with the sea green. Okay. So now we have 3 layers. One layer, the default layer is in black, the other one lasvender, and the other one is the sea moss. Okay. Let me show you kind of why we might want to change the color. If we, and we haven't got into the 2D tools, but I'm just going to quickly create a box. So I'm going to left click on this box icon. And I'm just going to click once, move the cursor out, click a second time, and then bring that up. Okay. Let's go ahead and change the setting to shaded. And because the checkbox is on default, this came out this gray color. Now it doesn't actually come out black. It's actually this gray color. Okay, so even though it's black here, anything that is this standard gray color is the black in Rhino. Okay. Now if we copied this, or let's say we create another box. go ahead and create another box to the right of that. This time we'll go over here. Okay. You could begin to see that they all start looking exactly the same. So if you have objects that are all the same color, then it might not be beneficial um, to have them all in the same layer, and it might help to have them in different colors, right? And so that's where adding the colors to the layers are. So if I wanted to turn this and add this into my masking layer, then I can simply select on the masking layer, right click on it, and then we can select change object layer. Okay. And now this masking object is in my masking layer. If I wanted to put this in my lines layer, I could right click, oops, not right there. I'll right click, select the lines. It's just a single click, then right click, and then change object layer. Okay. And as mentioned and shown in the previous lectures, now that it's in its own layer, we can go ahead and hide them, or we can lock them, right? So that it never gets selected. So that's the benefit of the layers. Okay. Hopefully, if it doesn't make sense yet, or if it kind of makes sense, but you're not really understanding when or how we'll use them, it's going to make a lot more sense as we kind of move along in the class. But it is important right now to understand how do you create layers, how do you add objects into layers, and how do we adjust the color if we need to adjust, the colors. Okay. Okay. And one last thing about layers is you can model in two ways when it comes to layers. We can model everything and just leave everything in the default layer and then move everything into the corresponding layers, just like we did right now. We modeled everything in the default layer, then we selected the object and we put it in the corresponding layer. You can, however, if you wanted to, click right here wherever the checkbox column is, and wherever the checkbox, not the checkbox, the check mark, wherever the check mark is, that is the current layer. So let's go into make the masking the current layer and notice what happens now when I create the box. It automatically puts it in my masking layer. And anything I do from here on out is going to go into my masking layers unless I change the layer again. Okay? So that check mark signifies which layer the object that you're currently working in is going to be, right? Now, I personally prefer to always leave the check mark in the default layer, only model in the default layer, and then select the objects that I model and move them into the correct layer. Oops. Move them into the layer that I want to move them into. Okay. The reason I prefer this, and this is a preference, some people prefer to click on the correct layer and then it avoids having to always move objects afterwards, right? I prefer to always work in the default layer simply because when I'm modeling, I'm very invested and focused on what it is I'm modeling, and I forget all about layers, and I forget all about changing and modeling and changing the layers before I start modeling, say, my walls, and then I'll get into the windows and I'll forget to change my layer into the Windows layer and so on, right? And so next thing I know, my windows are in my walls layer because I'd never changed the setting to go into my Windows layer, right? And so then I have to go back. And so you're kind of going back and having to adjust things. Um, and then sometimes you have modeled for like an entire day and forgot that your everything is still in the walls layer, right? But this definitely is a preference. And you're going to begin to kind of figure it out on your own as you begin to model more and more. You'll see you'll find your own preferences that you prefer. Okay. All right. So enough about layers. Let's jump into, I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Let's jump into our commands. Okay. Now we have the selection tool. This is essentially just the arrow, right? And this allows us to click. So absolute worst case scenario, if you're stuck, you don't know what you're doing, you're in the middle of a command, you can't figure it out, you could always hit the escape key on the keyboard a couple times, or just come over here to the selection tool, and that's going to allow us to create the selection. Okay. We do have the points command, but we rarely will ever use points. This really kind of comes in a little bit more once we get into complex geometry. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip that. Now the next one here is our lines. And you'll notice when I place my cursor, we have the option of polyline and we have the option of line segment. And ironically, the left button on the cursor, the left button click is the predominant or most commonly used command out of the two, right? And now when you look at this, it might seem a bit odd because you think, well, the line tool should probably want to draw line segments. And also, what is a polyline? It's probably actually your first question. So we're going to go ahead and explore both of them. I'm actually going to start with the right click, which is clicking on the line segment. So I'm going to right click on the cursor. And what a line segment will do, notice I'm in my lines layer. I'm going to go ahead and go back to default because it is in black and we'll be able to see that. What a line segment does is it essentially creates a line segment. So I click once and then I click a second time and I could hit enter to complete it, right? To complete that. I'm also going to turn off orthographic because I don't like that. So this is a line. Let's go back. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, but this time I'm going to do a polyline. So I'm going to left click and I'm going to draw a line again, click, move the cursor and click to finish. And you notice again, it wants to keep going. So I'll hit the enter on the keyboard. Okay, so I have two lines. One's a little bit more crooked than the other, but they're essentially two lines. If I come over here to the right where it says properties, when I click on the line segment, okay, it does give me general information, right? And when I click on the polyline, it also gives me pretty much the same information. However, so they look exactly the same and the properties are very, very similar. However, the polyline actually allows us to do multiple commands or additional commands that a line segment doesn't. We talked before about, the difference between extrusion and poly surfaces in previous lectures, right? And that the poly surface is actually like is a solid, and therefore it has a lot more information. Um, there's just more to a poly surface as opposed to an extrusion, which is essentially just a bunch of surfaces that are taped together at the seams. The same is true with a line and a polyline. Okay, so a polyline, I could actually draw, let's say, a box, and that gets joined together. And I could then select this. Let's see if we have. I can then select this and type in, say, area. And it's going to give me the area of this box. Now, if this was just a line segment, then there is no information on that line, right? Or there is no information generated from the actual line segment. So we almost always want to model using the polyline command, which is why it's on the left click as opposed to a right click. Okay. So polyline is essentially a line. Think of it as a smart line that can hold a lot more information that a line segment cannot. Okay. Before we move on to the next one, which is our curve tools, I'm going to go ahead and just draw a little zigzag over here that I think is going to help us out in understanding our next our next command, which is the curves. Okay. Now we have here again two options. Right? I should have mentioned, and this is true for the lines as well, that all of our commands have a little triangle pull out. So we click on that, and that's going to give us additional commands that fall within our curve command. We could also click at this. You see this kind of heavy header, gray header line. We could click and drag this, and now we have a custom kind of toolbar so that we could see all of them if we needed to. Okay. And in the curve command, you can see there's all sorts of curves to select from. I'm going to pick on these two here. And so the first one is control point curve. So I'm going to left click on this, making sure that my O snaps are on and that I at least have the end checked on. I'm going to go ahead and click on each of these points. And you'll notice when I'm done, I'll hit the enter key. You'll notice that what it did when I select this is created, um, it created a curve based on these points, right? So if I move this, you could see that these points line up to where we clicked. Let me undo that, Control Z. If we select one of these points, select the curve point and move it, then it'll go ahead and adjust the curve. But the curve is actually created using kind of an algorithm. Not an algorithm, it's a mathematical equation, kind of for parabola, so sine and cosine. Um, it uses those points to create the curve, which is why you can get such smooth curves in Rhino that you really can't get in a lot of other softwares, right? We're now kind of diving into what makes Rhino very unique and different from a lot of other softwares is the fact that it can do this command. A lot of the commands can't really do this as well as Rhino can. So the first command here is control points curve. So it's creating a curve based on the control point. Let me undo that one more time, which is different than, say, the curve, the interpolate points. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with that one. Interpolate points. So I'm going to go ahead and left click on this, and we're going to click on the same exact location, but now you'll see that it's creating points where we click. And this I always find to be much more useful than trying to find the middle point, right? Or trying to find um, like this kind of smoothed out curve between these points. Okay, because when we create curves, we typically want to create them where we click. And so you'll notice that the points on this one, these points over here, are farther out, right? And so it's basing the points on where we clicked, which is different. Okay. So this interpolate curve or interpolate points for a curve is actually the most beneficial one I seem to find. But both of these do some really, really interesting, really great curves. There's one I'm going to give you just since I see it right now. There's this one command called tween between two curves. And this is a really fun one. So I'm going to go ahead and use the interpolate point curve, and I'm going to create at random two curves. And by the way, when you are in the command and you want to end it, we've talked about it, you could hit enter, you could hit the space bar because your thumb should be on the space bar. And to start the last command, you just hit the space bar again. Okay. And the space bar will automatically start the previous command that was used. So now I'll go ahead and create another curve here. And you'll notice that these curves kind of have nothing to do with one another. Okay. When I use the tween between two curves, if I click on this, it's asking me select start and end curve. So I'll go ahead and select this one and this one. And I hit enter. And what this does is it gives me a curve, kind of gives me the average between these two curves, right? So it gives me an additional curve that is essentially kind of the middle of the two curves that I created, which is pretty cool, but it gets better. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and delete. I'm going to use the same command. I'll click on this curve and this curve. And up here in the options, now I imagine with my Mac users, it's going to be over here on the left-hand side. You'll notice that one of the options that we have is number. Number equals 1. This is how many tween curves do we want to generate. In this case, it generated 1. But if I click here and I type in something like, let's say 20, enter, then, and I'll hit enter again, I get this really cool kind of graphic, which is essentially, you know, the in-between of these 2 points gives us this one, but then the in-between of these 2 points will give us, I don't know, probably this one and so on and so on. And it just continues in generating those, which ends up giving us a really interesting kind of curvature. graphic. Now it is just a 2D graphic, but with the tween curve, we can now later in the future pull this up and generate actual form um, from just creating two curves, right? So, anyways, this is one of many cool things that Rhino does with curvature. But moving on, go ahead and close this out. Quickly just go over some of these other commands that are pretty kind of self-explanatory. We have the circle command. Now on this one, the same thing, we click on the pull down right here, and it gives us different types of creating the circle. So sometimes if you don't have the radius, so right here it says circle center radius, as opposed to this one, which is diameter, as opposed to this one, which says 3 points. So these are different ways of generating and creating a circle, right? Now, most of the time we always have either the radius or the diameter, but occasionally you don't have that and you want this circle to be in between 3 points or, you know, the tangent of other circles. So there are other commands that you can do, right? Now, again, really quickly, kind of side note, remember that you could always come over here to the help. And as you're clicking around, this is going to pop up. So it gives you a better explanation because I know I'm just kind of covering everything fairly quickly, but this will give you a better explanation of what that command does. But since I'm right here in the radius, right, it's asking me to find the center of a circle. Oops. Come on. So I'll go ahead and click once. And now it's asking me for the radius. At this point, I can change it to a diameter. But right now, let's say that the radius is, actually, I have no idea. Let's go 10 feet. 10 apostrophe enter. Oh, perfect. And there we have it. We can click on the pull down and go to diameter. So we'll say click at the center, move the cursor out. And now you'll notice that the circle is kind of showing up differently based on relationship to my cursor. But here it's asking for the end of the diameter. So let's go ahead and say it's also 10 feet, right? Going back to this radius, so let's go ahead and click on this icon right here. Again, the center, by default, this one is to specify the radius. Okay, I could click in the center, and notice that when I click in the center, my options up here change. Let me undo or escape that just so that you can see that. And this is true for a lot of commands. So I'll click here, and right here, it's asking me to find the center of the circle, and I have some options. So we can still change if we want to find it from a 2 point or 3 point or tangent. Um, but if I go ahead and click on the center, watch what happens up here. I'm going to go ahead and click, and now my options change again. Okay. I can specify the diameter by clicking here. I can even specify the circle based on the circumference. But let's go with the diameter, and let's say now that the diameter is 15 feet, right? So you could always, or not can, always check your options that pop up in the command line. Now, again, for my Mac users, those options still exist for you. They're just going to show up over here on the left-hand side. Okay. We have the ellipse tool. There's not a lot of additional kind of commands with the ellipse tool. The ellipse is pretty self-explanatory. We create the ellipse from the radius point, and then we just kind of adjust that way. We could create the ellipse from a diameter, something like that, right? Um, so play around with it, but I don't find the ellipse tool, the use of it too often. The arc tool, we can create arcs, right? We could specify, let's say 170 degrees, right? Or you can just click. We also have different options. So if we click in here, we could create the arc by clicking on the center, then the start, and then the angle, just like we did over here, as opposed to this one, which is the start, then the end point, and then the point on the arc. So let's go ahead and click on this one. So it's the start, and again, the commands are up here, or what it's asking is up here. It's the start, then the end of the arc, and then the actual angle of the arc, right? So these are all very useful ways of creating a lot of these 2D commands. simply because you never know when we're modeling, we don't know what information we do and don't have. And so sometimes we have to go related to something that's in the model, right? So it's good to know that you have other options. Okay. And I'm spending, just as a side note, I'm also spending a lot of time on these 2D tools just because this is how we get started with 3D modeling. It all has to kind of start, it usually starts off with lines that we then group, or then we join, and then we extrude that and turn that into a polysurface and so on. But it always starts with 2D lines. So it's important to know what our 2D tools are. We have the rectangle tool, which I did cover in the previous. We can go ahead and just, click on one side and click on the other side. We could also specify. So if I click once, right, other corner length, I could say I want to go this way. The first number that it always asks for is along the red axis. So I could say, you know what, I want to go 10 feet this way. And this way I'm going to go up 20, right? So that's the rectangle tool. Again, I know we covered that in the last tutorial. Then we have the polygon, which is essentially shapes. So if I click here, it's going to ask me for the number of sides. So right now, by default, it's set to 5. So when I click and I move the cursor out, I get these shapes. Okay. I could change this and say, you know what, I want 10 sides. And now I have a decagon? I should know this. If we change this, we can change the number to however many sides we want. However, the only time I really ever use this is to create triangles, because I'm always creating arrows or triangles or something we kind of somehow to create. So I'll click inside here and I change this to 3. And now we can easily create a triangle, right? Um, the last command here is going to be the fillet tool. And the fillet tool joins two perpendicular lines, right? So in other words, and it could be line segment or polylines. So if I have one polyline going this way, and then another one going this way, this way. By the way, I should mention, I have ortho turned off, right? If I don't want to go in and turn ortho on, because I'm just going to draw one line really quickly and then I want to turn it off, I'll go ahead and start with my line segment. I'll go ahead and click, right? But if I hold down the shift key, which is where your pinky should be, if I hold down the shift key, it's going to automatically, and I'm holding down on it. I didn't press on it. I'm holding down on it. Um, then it'll kind of pop into orthographic mode, right? And you'll even see it highlighted up here. But the minute I let go of my pinky finger, it turns off. So that shift key while you're in the middle of a line command, it allows you to temporarily go into ortho mode. So I could draw a straight line. Okay. So I have two lines, and if I want to join them, how do I find this midpoint where the two of them connect? Well, I can click on this fillet command. And right here where it says radius equals 1, this means that the radius will be 1 foot. But if I change this to 0, that means that the radius will be set to 0. So I can click here and click there, and they both join. I'm going to Control Z, undo, or I think it's Command Z if you're on a Mac. We're going to do that one more time. So click here. Right here where it says radius, we're going to set it back to 1. Enter. And I'm going to click here and click there. And that's what the fillet tool actually is meant for, to fillet, to curve the edge of two lines. Okay. So if we had, let's say, these lines intersecting already, we could use the fillet tool and say, you know what, I want this radius on this one to be 3 feet. I'm going to go ahead and click on this line, click on this line, and it gives us a 3-foot radius. Okay. The same can be done if these are intersecting lines. The same can be done to kind of trim, take all that off. So if we click here, change this to 0, enter, If I click and click, then it kind of trimmed these excess lines because it set the radius to 0, right? And so that is the affiliate tool. And that kind of covers all of our 2D tools. So I think from here, just go click around, play around with a couple of these 2D tools, see what they do. And then when you're done, go ahead and just close the file down. All right. Hopefully this was helpful.